Hello, everyone. This is John Darkley from Altomind Podcast, episode 2, with video now. And thanks for tuning in. I will be talking with Michael Black. He has his own channel on YouTube, and where he talks about, well, mainly philosophy, society, politics, life, conspiracy, and he has the ability. He's actually one of the few people I know that can explain very complex things in a quite a clear manner, which is very important if you want to spread truth to the masses, because you can also come across like someone who is just conspiracy nut, and what the hell are you talking about? So that's actually something I really like about Michael's approach, and we're going to talk about the concept of philosophy and ideology and what it actually means to bring back philosophy to a society which is primarily motivated by ideology. And this seems to be a very, very important topic now, because society seems to be very split in half now, like no other time. At least that's what I experience. So, Mr. Black, it's good to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be able to speak with yourself and with your audience also. I think we are in a sort of at a nexus point essentially in society right now, where it's literally make or break. The populations of different countries either have to start waking up, or they're going to find themselves in very hot water in a very short amount of time. We're on the precipice, I think, of either total annihilation as a species, and I don't think I'm overstating that. We are on that cusp, and it could go in that direction, or it could go in the direction where we do begin to make choices that actually start pushing us towards some sort of better state, if you will, as living conscious beings. We're not doing that right now, though. Too many people are under this hallucination, if you will, right? They're under this form of hypnosis right now, and they're living substandard lives. They're living subpar lives. Most people today are not happy, and they cannot put their finger on why this is the case. But a lot of it does have to do with the fact that there has been a total destruction and an erosion of Western civilization and the philosophies which built it up. So this is part of the reason why I think we need to return to those philosophies, and I've been trying to do that a little bit through my work, and others have been doing a stellar job in doing very much the same thing as well. But not enough people are grasping these as you say, complex ideas, essentially. So it's important that people who know what they're talking about in the realm of philosophy do break it down into bite-sized form, if you will, so that the masses can understand it better and think better, so that they can think critically in these current times. But this idea that people are struggling with right now in terms of how we're living, we are living in ideological bubbles, it seems to me. And you might ask, what is the difference between a philosophy and an ideology? Because a lot of people don't actually know that. They think there's a subtle difference. It's actually a massive difference. There's a huge gulf between philosophy and ideology. A philosophy, to put it in a nutshell, is an exploration of reality and the place of every conscious being in that reality, or perhaps even if it's solipsistically focused or anthropocentrically focused on just us as human beings, then it would be our place in this vast universe and how we interact with other things, other beings, and so on. So that would be what philosophy, that's how I would define what philosophy is, whereas an ideology is a completely different animal. An ideology forms the basis for economic systems, for political systems, for legal systems, and to my eyes at least, it is very, very artificial. I can't see anything in ideologies which addresses the underlying philosophical questions, the epistemological questions essentially, that haunt us as living creatures, right? Why are we here? Who are we? What are we
Yeah.
here to do, right? All these different things that we all think about at least once in our lifetime. And what has happened is that these artificial systems have been imposed on people as a sort of pseudo answer. That is to say, they don't actually give you a way to find the answers yourself. They're a placeholder in a great many ways for answers which you should be seeking on an individual level. But the worst part about ideologies in the current times is that they're not even looking to answer the existential questions anymore. These ideologies are bereft of existential questions. The ideologies I'm speaking about in this case would be Marxism, would be this communist doctrine that's been pumped into people's soft heads. It would be the socialist doctrines that have been pumped into people's heads. So these ideologies are worse than the other types of ideologies that existed previously, like, say, in the form of Christianity, or say in the form of other pagan ideals and so on, right? So particularly with Christianity, this is something else I'll hopefully be able to get across well enough. Christianity did something really fascinating, which was originally it started out as attempting to answer the existential questions. Then it was co-opted, if you will, by the Holy Roman Empire. And then from that point on, it became a fascistic ideology whereby it was imposed on people as a tyrannical form of rule, and it persecuted actual Christians. And we saw this in the early ages of the church and prior to it as well. And not a lot of people know this or understand this. At least they don't understand it with any depth of clarity. So we saw that happen with Christianity. And then something very curious happened some few hundred years after that, which was that Christianity attempted to return to its original roots. And so it began looking again at the existential questions, thanks to the works of Thomas Aquinas, St. Francis of Assisi, and many, many others, some of whom I've covered, some of whom I have not. So many people have come along to try and look at things in a philosophical sense, even within the confines of Christian doctrine. So that allowed Western civilization, because of the proliferation of Christianity and because of the spreading of these philosophical ideas, which were originally Greek, but were co-opted by Christianity again, if you will, it helped Western civilization to gain a firm footing in the basis of logic, grammar, and rhetoric, ironically enough. And at the same time, people were instilled with a sense of ethos, pathos, and logos, and the importance of the logos was stressed inside this theological framework. But then what happened was these superficial ideologies came along that had nothing to offer whatsoever, except for the total annihilation and destruction of philosophy, which is what it was really all about. The destruction of Christianity, by default, actually had a whole lot to do with the fact that they were looking to destroy the underpinning foundations, that the philosophical foundations which allowed the West to prosper. So this is where we are in the current time, I would say, and these dangerous and insidious ideologies are what are fundamentally responsible for that. These are diametrically opposed things, philosophy and ideology. They're diametrically opposed. They do not go together at all. And into that mix, added to that mix, would be the current problem of Islamism as well, which again makes things exceptionally more difficult and complex to deal with geopolitically. So with Islam, a lot of people, again, are not familiar with Islam's history, but whatever the original form of Islam may have actually been, right? And goodness really knows what it was, because there are actually some very interesting texts out there, and I'll be recommending these to people on my channel in the near future. There are some very interesting texts which show that Islam, at least way, way, way back when, some 1600 years ago, was not what it transformed into today, which is to say this malevolent form of what can only be described as a nihilistic, eschatological religion.
Ideology, perhaps.
Yes, it's an ideology again, as you rightly say. So, but that happened as a result of the foundational texts being changed, being rewritten, some of them even being created out of thin air, which is the case in many instances with religion. But in Islam's case, it was particularly sinister, because the basic ideas that Islam took root from were those that were enshrined in the Talmudic texts of Judaism. Islam is Talmudic in its beginnings and its origins, at least again in the sense that we understand it today. The current variant of Islam, which is what everyone's facing, it has its basic roots in the Talmud and in the Mishnahs, which a lot of people don't know. This is why it's direct, and rabbinical scholars know this, by the way. This is why you can see the complete analogous mirroring of the Judaic texts to Islam. But it's not the Judaic texts of the 12 books of Moses that they mirrored. No, this was the Talmudic text. This is the insidious part of Judaism that was copied, the darker aspects, which are to do with the dark occult, which we'll be talking about later on, hopefully. So the darker aspects, which I would term as being somewhat demonic in nature, satanic, I would say, is probably a better way of putting them. Those were incorporated into this ideology, and this ideology proliferated by the sword primarily, and by intimidation and threat, and the marriage of the state and the mosque, if you will, right? There is no separation of state and mosque in Islam. It's a political system, it's a legal system, it's everything bundled into the one thing. So this is why we have this... and we in the West don't understand this, because the roots of Christianity, as I say, were in philosophy, ultimately in the beginnings of it, and then midway through it again with the resurgence of thought, if you will, inside that Christian paradigm. Whereas Islam doesn't have that. Islam is not looking to reach the numinous. Again, at least in its current incarnation, it's not looking to do that. It's looking to subjugate and enslave people.
Right.
And this is what makes it profoundly dangerous. But the reasons that I've stated in terms of the malevolence of Islam and why it's there are also the same reasons why you find that Islam mirrors these other ideologies literally almost exactly. In the case of Marxism, in the case of communism or socialism, you'll find that there are intricate links between Marxist doctrine, communist doctrine, socialist doctrine, which are basically offshoots of all the same thing, and we can talk about the origins of those in a second as well. But also in Islam as well. Islam literally goes hand in hand with all of these. There is no separation between any of these. And of course, feminism as well plays a part in all of this. It's one big hodgepodge of communistic thought, communistic ideal, which stemmed from the socialist form of thought, which began with the French Revolution.
Yeah.
And this is something that, again, most people are not overly familiar with. And I think that this is why, and we can talk about the reasons behind that later on again, but this insidious marriage between these dark powers, if you will, and these dark forms of ideology and the, let's call them the powers of the state, if you will, that have been enforcing these very things, that have been, for example, Islamifying the West through the enshrining of blasphemy laws into their legal systems, or in the case of this ideology of feminism, where they've been destroying any true sense of masculinity in the West, or in the case of pure Marxism, they've been proliferating this idea of class warfare. So we've got all of these problems endemic in society because these people have imposed their system and they have infiltrated every aspect of life insofar as the way that we live in these current systems. The great mistake people make, if I may say this, and then I've been rabbiting on here for a while, so I'll let you jump in and you know.
Sure.
But the great mistake we make here in the West is that we assume that these things have always been there. To illustrate this problem, you look at the central banking system which exists, which relies wholly on fiat currency and is essentially designed to be the ultimate system of enslavement through debt. And if you ask people today, they assume that banks have always been there. They assume that these centralized banking practices in particular have always existed, that debt always existed, because they were born into bondage. So they cannot possibly conceive of a time when none of this existed. This is the great irony of life, if you will, because we as human beings find it very hard to go beyond the point of our birth. We find it very hard to stretch our minds into history and to realize there was a time when none of this existed. You see? And this is the mistake everyone that's trapped inside these ideological bubbles makes as well. So again, I don't want to overstress the Islam issue, but if you look at people that are born inside that ideology, they believe that that ideology is unchanged, the foundational texts have been unchanged and have been there forever. They actually genuinely believe that. Right? And the same thing is true of people that get into Marxism. They assume that Marxism is the only correct way and that it's always been there. Yes, Marx put it into writing, but you know, this is the natural way that human beings were supposed to be. It's ludicrous. But this is the outlook people end up with. It's the perspective they have, because again, it's just an unfortunate part of nature that we struggle to go beyond that barrier, which is to do with things that happened before our existence and things that may happen after our existence on this earth, because our lifetimes are finite naturally.
So you mentioned, how Islam, as it is now, just not just looks like the Talmudic doctrine, but but I saw a video some time ago where this rabbi says that the Jewish people and the Muslim people should join forces against the Western world. I mean, is that what it all means?
I wouldn't say that necessarily. There are people who advocate for that, and those are very, very dangerous people indeed. And these are the people that I would refer to as being heavily steeped in the dark mystical traditions of the Kabbalistic magical systems, if you will.
Yeah.
That's to do with the dark occult, and we'll get into that later on, as I say. But the origins are profoundly complex in terms of Islam itself. It's something people should read up on, because there was no city called Mecca originally. This is the interesting thing. This is according to the research of Patricia Crone, who taught at, I think it was Cambridge, I believe, Cambridge University. She looked into this in depth, as of many other people. Tom Holland, for example, has also looked into this. He's a historian in The Shadow of the Sword, I believe the book is called. All of these various people who are historians, who are learned academics, have looked at Islam and have found that none of the things that are proclaimed by the official history of Islam are actually true at all. So it's a direct rip-off of the Talmudic texts, as I say. How those ended up in that form is something that is still being debated in some respects. I think what most likely happened was that again, some very nefarious people with some very nefarious agendas decided that the best way to proliferate Talmudic ideals, that is to say, this supremacist ideology, which views everyone else as being lesser of a human being, which views everyone else as being less valuable as a human being, those were proliferated through Islam. So Islam is the tool which is being used to fulfill a greater agenda. That is my take on it. And obviously, as we see with communists or socialists, the useful idiots within those ideologies go forth and do what they're told to do, what they're programmed to do, and they can't see through their own programming to understand how they have been positioned as pawns in this great game by these dark occultists. With regards to the dark occult and what this pertains to, there are many forms of occult thought, okay, and there are many magical systems, and I'm using the word magic in the truest sense of the word, as people like Israel Regardie and Aleister Crowley might have looked at it, and others who were well versed in the occult. These Magical systems have a light side and a dark side to them. If one tries to aspire to be better, to reach for the numinous, to help humanity as a whole, but starting with the individual themselves and then that individual's family and then the community and progressing in an outwards manner, if one looks to better the situation, to lessen the suffering and the harm of that comes to others, then you're looking to do something that can be termed as being essentially good, right? So there's a light, good side to the occult, if you will. And that's to do with the, there's many different forms of occult thought, as I say. But the Kabbalistic form of thought in that respect is the tree of life. It's represented in the tree of life. Whereas there's a dark side to the occult, which not a lot of people understand, which is the tree of death, which is the inverse. It's the complete opposite. It literally, both of them do what they say on the tin, essentially. The tree of life, if that's pursued in one's own personal life, in one's own psychology, in every facet of your life, you'll find that it actually bears a lot of positive fruit, right? It literally brings life. Whereas the tree of death literally brings death and nihilism and destruction, because it centers on the demonic. And so, particularly in these Kabbalistic trains of thinking and training, what happens is those who are very deeply versed in how to manipulate, which is essentially what the dark occult is all about. It's to do with psychological manipulation, it's to do with spiritual manipulation, it's to do with mental manipulation, every form of manipulation you can think of. All of these systems are used in the dark occult in order to control people. Right? And in the darker, it was termed the Klipothic system, it turns people into husks. Klipoth means to be a husk. Now, you can do that to people. You can empty them out of all things that are valuable, that are useful, that consist of their conscious being, that help them to aspire to be better. You can suck all of that out of them. And in fact, you can go a step further and make sure that new people who come into this world are born as husks and don't have any of that in them, which is what this current system is doing. But it goes back to this Klipothic realm, this tree of death, these ideas in the dark occult that really are all about destroying humanity, that taking away the best of humanity, taking away your humanity.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
But would you then say that the majority of society, of Western society, is under a sort of spell, this magic, dark occult spell of this Marxist communist mindset, because this seems to be a very all it seems to be in every branch of, let's say, politics, in all of the universities, in society itself, in people's mindsets, this absolute hatred for individual growth. And for example, it's a bit of a different topic, but for example, the transgender phenomenon, really, they always claim that we should be more tolerant, but weren't we already tolerant of? I mean, they were here for a long time, right? So where does this victimhood mindset come from? Is this some magical thing that is happening, which is kind of downloads into this, or which is being uploaded, to society? Because it seems like there's this explosion of, like you said, people are just batshit crazy in some instances, and this seems to be the very well. It seems like a sort of an end time, Is that a bit? Yeah.
Well, I would say that you've hit the nail on the head in many respects with regards to that. On a deeply spiritual level,
Yeah.
That is what is going on. People are under a spell. It's a hypnotic spell that they are contending with, and they're finding it very difficult to break out of,
Yeah.
because it is so insidious that it burrows its way directly into the subconscious. You see, the systems of persuasion that are used, persuasion systems are basically magic in a very strange and interesting way, because it's to do with the psychology of the person. It's to do with the what might we term it as? I'm trying to think here. The Yeah, it's the thinking processes of the individual. You've got logic circuits in your head, basically, and persuasion systems bypass those. And that's all to do with how the human mind works. It's psychology, right? And psychology, of course, when it's understood fully, persuasion systems are nothing more than an extension of hypnosis. So you can use certain tools in language, for example, in rhetoric, to bypass people's thinking processes, their logical circuits, and make them do things that they ordinarily would not do. And that's exactly what is going on out there right now. So, yes, you could call it a spell. It is in its purest sense. And also, spiritually speaking, there's that higher dimension through which things are also being controlled. That I don't want to go into too much in this, just because I want to keep it level-headed for the people who are new to this understanding, if you will. Right? We don't want to get people too confused about many things. But yes, in a very real sense, people are being mind controlled. People are being mind controlled en masse. And they are actually, partly because of this mind control, but partly because of the indoctrination and programming of their parents. They also themselves are willing to be mind controlled, which is a very interesting state of affairs. They're actually choosing their own slavery, which is something that you wouldn't expect ordinarily. If you're a free-thinking person, you'd think slavery is the last thing you would want. But in this instance, there it is. Human beings seem to be jumping at the chance to become debt slaves, to become slaves to the state. They're handing over every single legal right they have, right? They're handing over the natural rights that they have to the government. This makes no sense to a person like me or you, but to them, it apparently makes all the sense in the world. So people are choosing in a great many ways, as I say, to become enslaved, and it's a very sad and sorry state of affairs to see. When it comes to the transgender person's issue, this has exploded in the public consciousness for a few reasons, and this is to do with the fact that these ideologically possessed individuals, this is possession, pure and simple, by the way, this is what's going on. Parts of their psyche are possessing these people wholly and completely. Their conscious minds are being overtaken by those subconscious parts of themselves which are dark, which really are looking to cause harm. We've got that in all of us, by the way, as people. This I've said publicly many times. We've all got that in us. And what these dark occultists do is find a way of channeling that, so that's the dominant part of your personality. So with this transgender issue, the fact of the matter is, the population typically in the human species has always consisted of about 0.3% roughly of people having this gender dysphoria. That's always been there, right? And society not only has tolerated people who suffer from this terrible problem, but also in many cases has revered them, which is interesting. You can look into ancient Japanese societies to see this, and also in India as well in the past. And so there's many cultures that have oftentimes been fascinated and have tried to understand these differences in society, and no one necessarily was looking to victimize other people in that form in the ancient times. What happened afterwards, though, was that these ideologies, because again they're insidious, they proliferate, any type of ideology can make somebody become a very malevolent creature who is seeking to persecute. Right, so that's one side of it. On the other side of it, you've got these more insidious forms of ideology which have come along over the last, let's say, 160 years roughly, and they've pushed everyone in society to think of themselves as victims. it's victimology. So you've got women thinking that they're victims and that they're oppressed by the patriarchy. You've got transgender people thinking that they're oppressed by, I don't know what terminology they're now using, cis, hetero,
Cisgendered, yeah.
yes, all this sort of business, right? So everyone is, anyone who is basically a male and is white and is heterosexual is the oppressor. Now, this is lunacy, right?
Yeah.
This is pure lunacy in true terms, because power dynamics are not dependent on identity politics. At least they shouldn't be, right? But these people have been taught that they are. It's a very, very dangerous thing to do. So a lot of these young people, particularly, that are growing up with their heads having been pumped full of this nonsense that white heterosexual men are oppressing everyone else. And keep in mind, I'm saying this as somebody who is non-white, okay?
Exactly.
The idea that only, and this is the insidious part of it, that only white heterosexual men do the oppressing, and that there's some sort of privilege that goes along with being a white heterosexual man. This is
It's insane.
It's insane. It is. It's not the right way to think at all about any situation, because it's plainly, objectively not true. Anyone, in real terms, anyone can oppress anyone else. It just takes a power differential. Okay? And it's all to do with the mentality of the other person. And by the way, in case anyone's wondering, everyone, if you really look at it in an objective sense, everyone's oppressing everyone else.
Right.
Okay, I'm oppressing people in some way, shape, or form, right? The people that are being oppressed by me in some case, and keep in mind the definition of oppression according to the radical left, which is the group that we're essentially talking about here, is that you're imposing your will in some way, shape, or form, right? You're misusing your authority. But we're doing that every time when we purchase a product, or when we're selling a product, or when we're interacting or exchanging ideas. We're doing that all the time, right? I'm coming into your space, if you will. For example, in this conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm coming into your space, you're coming into mine. We're speaking, we're exchanging ideas, and then this is being broadcast into the space of other people. So in a sense, we're actually doing a whole lot of oppressing here. Okay? So, I mean, it's a ridiculous thing to think that only one group can be oppressive in that way and shape and form. It's nonsensical. And the other thing I would say is that actually, if you do find yourself being a victim of something, you have two options in life. And this is just a general observation on my part, but you have two options. One is to continuously believe that narrative that you are a victim and woe is me, in which case you will never ever be able to be in a position where you improve your life situation. And the other is to actually accept that problem or accept that difficulty or challenge or hurdle and say, okay, well, I'm going to continue marching on. That is the whole point of evolution. It is the whole reason we exist, to overcome challenges. Right? So if somebody literally is malevolently putting an obstacle in your way in some way, shape, or form, or is seeking to do you damage or harm, your job as a human being is to surmount that. It'll actually improve your character, and you'll actually feel as if you've achieved something through doing that as well. But if instead we're catering to people who have this mindset that they cannot overcome anything and that they are perpetual victims, nothing will get done, nothing will get solved. Society won't change, people won't be able to improve their lots in life, nothing changes.
Right.
So, yeah, in terms of this phenomenon, that is a problem. And also, one of the other things about the transgender issue, I would say, that I would take serious issue with, is the fact that that has become an ideology in and of itself as well. Yeah. Exactly. And they're trying to indoctrinate children with this now in schools. Mm-hmm. In fact, not just in schools. I was reading an article just the other day where they were talking about how nursery school children, that is in the ages of about 3 or 4, are now being taught this
Yeah.
nonsense pertaining to sexuality, pertaining to human sexuality, transgenderism, and so forth. What is this? 2 and 3 year olds don't understand any of that, right?
Mhm.
So they're starting off straight away in their infancy, mind programming them. I would actually argue quite strongly that that's child abuse, right? Now, when a person's an adult, they can choose and decide in their own time in terms of if they do have that gender dysphoria issue. It is a psychological issue, and either that can be worked through with a psychiatrist or psychologist, or perhaps they do then, and they can then choose to take a path or a route that makes them more comfortable with who they are. That's not to say they do typically, because the suicide rates amongst transgender people are very, very high, extraordinarily high, even after they've transitioned. So there are problems with that kind of pandering, if you will. But nonetheless, people as adults are free to choose what they wish. But if you are doing that to children, particularly infant children, I think that is child abuse. It's tantamount to child abuse, and it should not be allowed. But it's being done again to further these agendas, unfortunately.
And one last thing about the transgenders. um, there was this 12-year-old boy from London, I believe, who thought he was actually a girl. So he told his mom, and he said, "I think I'm a girl," and so they went to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Well, you've got gender dysphoria, which is an actual, mental. Well, it's not. It's a skewed way of seeing yourself, of course. So this is an official label, gender dysphoria. But then these doctors then encourage them then to change the entire gender instead of giving them mental support, because this boy was 12 and he hasn't fully gone into puberty yet. So that whole phase was being blocked just to give him what he wants, to be a girl. But now he's 14 and he says, well, actually, I'm a boy. But unfortunately, he has boobs now. So why do these doctors then kind of encourage these kids and their families instead of saying, well, let's just wait a couple of years because he will grow out of it.
Well, people that do that, particularly doctors that do that in the medical profession, should be struck off, in my opinion.
Right.
They shouldn't be allowed to practice because, again, this is not the correct way to deal with this problem at all, at all. Now, again, that's not to say that this isn't a real issue. It is a real issue. People do experience these problems. Some people advocate strongly for in saying that this is a mental illness. You could term it in those in that way, but whatever way that we choose to describe the problem, right? The problem still remains in the person, right? And actually, the latest research does show that there's some sort of well, basically, when mothers are carrying a child in utero, what tends to happen is they're exposed to too much estrogen. That is to say, the embryo is exposed to too much estrogen. So that may have a whole lot to do with it. That plays a role clearly in this type of situation manifesting itself, right? But at the same time, it's not unnatural, right? I'll tell you what is unnatural, though. It's when it goes beyond the natural confines, if you will, which is to say, in society today, what is going on is that there are pollutants that are being put into every foodstuff that people are eating, that are being put into the water supplies, that are getting into our systems in all kinds of ways. Okay, and some of these pollutants happen to be estrogen mimickers. So things like BPA, for example, which is the coating in the inside of plastic containers that people use when they microwave foods, that seeps in, that the food leaches that into it. So when people ingest that, they're actually taking in massive doses of estrogen. This has been shown in over 700 scientific studies. 700 studies have shown this. And the latest studies that have been done on rats and mice have shown that it actually does produce transgenderism and issues of homosexuality and everything else in that population of mice and rats. And of course, mice and rats happen to be extraordinarily similar to human beings. What do you think all of that is doing to us? Okay, that's not taking into account the invention of the pill, right, which women take the morning after. So these types of contraceptives are also full of estrogen, and when women take that into their bodies, that gives them a flush of estrogen, and then what happens is, as we humans do, we right, all of that urine then goes back into the water supply, and the estrogen can't be taken out of the water supply, so we're being actually our systems are taking in more estrogen through that process as well. So the water supply is contaminated with estrogen, the food supply is contaminated with estrogen, and the effects that this is having are scientifically documented in other species. One would think it'd be a clever idea to maybe see what happens to human beings in those conditions, but no, scientists don't want to touch that with a barge pole right now. And the reason is because of what it would show, which is that this phenomenon of transgenderism, which has exploded beyond the 0.3% point, right? All of this is happening directly as a result of contamination of food supplies and water supplies. And also, kids, as we've talked about, are being indoctrinated inside these indoctrination centers we call schools. So their whole idea of themselves is being blown apart. And it's traumatizing them in a very real sense. It's actually traumatic to have your personhood blown to pieces. They're not ready for that. So adults even aren't ready for that. When adults go and see psychologists and psychiatrists and they start exploding their personality structures, even they struggle with it. So, well, you know, to think that kids will be okay with all of that, I mean, that's insane. It's nonsensical. But those are just my thoughts on it. Again, I'm not an expert in this field at all, but I just see this as an observer, and my casual observations on this are that there are some very, very serious problems with the way that transgenderism is being diagnosed, with the way that it's being treated, quote unquote, and nobody's really looking at the causal factors, which may not necessarily be purely rooted in innate biology.
Mm-hmm.
But those are my final thoughts on that, really.
Yeah, because we mentioned the the word spell and magic, and as if it's some spell casting, you know, as if it's some kind of influence falling down on society. But of course, that's not being done in that literal way, but it's done through ideology and mindset changing, and but so if there's a spell, then there must be spellcasters, right? And people talk enough about the the CFR or Bilderberg, or these groups which everyone by now I think has heard of. But when you look beyond those groups, it has to end up at some weird dark place where no one's ever been, right? And you mentioned in a live stream you did a couple of weeks ago about certain families who are just they look normal apparently. You mentioned the name Dubignon.
Yes.
And could you maybe talk a bit more about those families, the actual occultists,
Yeah, it's pretty simple, really. The ideologies we were talking about, as we talked about, came out of France in the French Revolution, during the French Revolution. People like Francois Charles Marie Fourier, for example, who was the progenitor of, this guy was the progenitor of socialism, and then by de facto, because his students all studied under him, like Marx and Engels, and so on, they became communists. So communism was an offshoot of socialism, and then obviously you get other derivatives and so on and so forth. But Fourier himself was a member of dark occult societies, and this has been very well documented through history, by the way. It's just that very few people have read these works on the occult and the proliferation of it in France and how things became something else and what have you. But socialism has its total roots in the dark occult. Now, what's interesting about Fourier specifically is that he was probably among the first people to mention the New World Order. Okay, and this has been mentioned numerous times by socialists, by communists, by people who believed in the doctrine. George H.W. Bush even mentioned this phrase many a time in many of his speeches, and that's because, contrary to a popular belief, right, he wasn't a conservative, he was a socialist. And if you take a look at all the policies he implemented and the crazy ideas he had, both as the director of the CIA and as the president and so on and so forth, they were all socialist in nature. They were all Keynesian economical models. They were all, I mean, it's amazing how he managed to go under the guise of conservatism to further the agenda of socialism. This is what it was all about. But getting back to Fourier, so this is the first guy to talk about the New World Order, essentially, and he's the father of socialism. He also happens to be, and this is again historically documented by numerous researchers, he's also the father of feminism. So the ideology of feminism even takes its cues from him. Now, this is a guy who believed, and I'm not making this up, you can actually read this in his own papers, that the seas would turn into lemonade.
Right.
This man was a mental case. He was a lunatic, right? But people followed him. It became like a cult, essentially. The same thing happened with Marx, by the way, and then with Stalin. These cults of personality developed, right? So, to make a long story very short, France had a lot of occult societies. Some of them happened to be dark lodges. Some of them happened to have ties, the black lodges, which were taken over by an actual organization once upon a time called the Illuminati. It did exist, and it did have this agenda of furthering a Luciferian doctrine. Okay, that is to say, it was satanic in nature in real terms, and they admitted to this. They admitted to this in their writings. So, to make a long story very short, many of the people in France who had studied these dark occult aspects of these Kabbalistic magical forms, which is where it ultimately began, by the way, for them at least, took to furthering that cause. That's the long and short of what happened. They went off the Talmudic text. They believed in that whole notion completely. They believed they were the chosen people. And continued down that path. Now, fast forward over the centuries to now, and these families have become extraordinarily powerful in the current world. And they are members of a dark occult society that virtually nobody's ever heard of, which is the Circle of the Black Sun. Because in Qliphothic magical belief systems, you see, in the light side of the Kabbalistic occult, you have the sun representing the tree of life. Okay, this obviously, because without the sun, we're not going to be alive, right? We'll be dead tomorrow, right? It's the life giver, the sun and the water, the seas, and so on and so forth. So, earth, wind, water, and fire. Okay, those are the principal elements: earth, air, fire, and water. Those are the elements that are responsible for life existing. But what the dark occult does is it takes those ideas, as we talked about earlier, and inverts them. So the Circle of the Black Sun inverted this idea. And so they believe not in life, but in death. Now, I've explained this in intricate depth in one of my videos, and people can check that out. It's the video on the occult specifically, where I talk about a lot of this. But nonetheless, the fact remains that this organization is the most powerful organization in the world. And it consists of only 13 bloodlines, 13 families. Okay, and the Dubignon family is one of those families. Now, most people will never have heard of it. In the live stream I was that I hosted, I just mentioned one name out of the 13. That's for a specific reason. I'll be talking about more of these names and releasing them over time as well. I can't go out there and just give everybody all the names because people, again, just aren't ready to grapple with all of this right now straight away. They have enough difficulty getting to grips with the political aspects of what we're talking about, let alone the deeper occult aspects of it, right? So it has to be done in a drip fashion, unfortunately, for people, especially because they are so heavily brainwashed. And I'm talking about the majority of people, not everyone, but the majority of people are so deeply under this hypnosis that they'd find it impossible to understand anything that was presented to them that is factually true. So the Dubignon family over time became the Turner family, and Ted Turner is a descendant of these people, and he owns CNN, for example, which is the most powerful media arm in the world. And it's no accident that after I started speaking about a lot of this stuff, you saw that the current US administration is now trying to take down CNN completely and wholly because they know that their time is coming. Okay, they know that these families know that they're running out of time because people are waking up little by little, slowly, even though there's very few people right now that are truly aware of the intricacy and depth of what is happening on this earth. There are people out there that know. Now, they've kept that information to themselves for a very long time, and that includes me, right? I've kept this to myself for years because the world just wasn't ready to know. It was literally going to be a case of casting pearls before swine. That was truly my view at that time, at that point in time. And then as I saw that people were aware, some people were aware, I thought, that alone, even if one person learns from it, makes it worthwhile for me to go out there and start dropping truth bombs, if you will, information to the people. So to make a long story very short, the Dubignon family was one of the central forces behind what became the Jekyll Island Club. And the Jekyll Island Club ultimately went on to push through the Federal Reserve Act and found the Federal Reserve. So they're a very, very powerful family. That's just one of them out of the 13, but there's many more. But these people aren't known in the public consciousness as real world changers, because here's the mistake people make. The biggest mistake people make out there is that they believe that money equals power. Okay, that's the mistake they make. They believe that the richer somebody is, the more powerful they must be. That is completely the wrong way to look at it, and here's the reason why. If you invented the fake money system, okay, the fiat currency system, you know that's monopoly money. You know it's valueless. It's fake, right? Why would you want to be overburdened with it? Now, take a look at the moves that a lot of the clever people in society who have acquired too much money have been making. What did they do? Like Warren Buffett and so on, Bill Gates, what are they doing? These are just minor players, but let's just use them as an example. Well, they are swapping this funny money, this fake currency, for real world control of resources. Okay, they're buying land, they're buying trains, transportation methods, and food sources, and you name it, right? Water sources, they're buying it all over. Okay, they're swapping that funny money for real world assets, for real world resources. Okay, this is what people get wrong. They don't understand this. So the richest people in the world, who do you think the richest person in the world is? Is it the guy that owns the oil field? Or is it the Saudi billionaires that are selling their oil, right, to bring in all these American dollars? Who's the richer out of the two? If I have an apple or a banana in my pocket, I'm richer than most people on this earth today. So it's the mental thinking of people that is completely the wrong way around. That's why they don't understand this. They keep assuming that it's the wealth that the power is derived from. It's not. The power is derived from the people themselves having very deep and intricate knowledge of things that they themselves do not understand. Okay? So these occult societies don't give a damn about money. When I say this, people react with shock. They think that can't be the case. But it is the case, I'm telling you. They care about resources.
They're smart.
Yes. Mm-hmm. They care about the resources. They care about the fact that they have control over your food source. Okay, they care about the fact that they have control over your water supply, but they don't care about much else. They couldn't care less how many digits and zeros and ones and zeros are going through their bank accounts. They couldn't care less how much currency is being pumped through the systems that they use. They don't give a damn about any of that. If they need money, they can magic it out of thin air. Okay, so this is literally the case. This is why I'm saying that these people, you wouldn't know them from Adam in most cases. Most people don't even know that Ted Turner owns CNN, for example.
Right.
Right, and that is one of the things that makes him very powerful, because he's been able to control the narrative for such a long time through his media stations, right? But he paid bottom price for that. He never, see, this is the thing. He didn't have to buy that media station. He built it from the ground up. He created it. Right? These people are good at doing that. You have to understand that. That's how they create value for themselves, at least monetarily. Right? At least that's the perception of the outside world in.
But does that mean that the CNN is fake news and all that kind of talk? Does that even matter to this Turner guy?
How do you mean?
Yeah, well, CNN is now being accused, right, of being fake news, and
Yeah.
but does the actual owner of CNN really care about that? Because he can just fund another media outlet, right?
Right. Well, not only is that the case, and you're absolutely correct about that, the CNN is basically fake news. At this point, everybody knows it because people are exposing it left, right, and center for all its shenanigans. They're setting up scenes and staging things and false flags and you name it. CNN's been up to all kinds of hideous crap, right? That being said, just because people have become aware of the fact that CNN is fake, right, doesn't mean that the Ted Turner's shaking in his boots. Because as you rightly said, you're completely correct on this. What happens is that there's new mediums that are channeled by these people. Like, for example, the internet. They can subvert people on the internet who have large followings, and this is already happening to a great extent. I'm not going to mention names in this right now, but you'll see that a lot of people with very large channels on YouTube, for example, or with big Twitter accounts and so on and so forth, they are being used as mediums through which the message of Turner et al. Can be pumped out. Right? They are the through force, if you like, for this fake news instead. And people lap that up. People still lap that up. So they don't understand. They are not as aware as they think they are. Mm-hmm. This is the great problem. Most people, because of their own egos, and this is something else that I try and explain to people. Look, you might think that you're awake or that you know what's going on in this world, but the chances are that you know diddly squat in real terms. The chances are you know diddly squat about what is going on out there. And the reason why people fool themselves into thinking they know something is because the conspiracy movement, I'm going to take a pot shot. I'm an equal opportunist when it comes to talking about people. Right? So the conspiracy movement was completely co-opted in and of itself, and they started shoving crap down the throats of people. Many of these popular conspiracy theorist channels and personalities, let's say. So people started lapping up that and thinking that, oh, because we know what this guy said or we know what that guy said, well, now we know what's going on, right? No, all this happened is that you've just taken in another fake outlet and latched onto that because you think that person is a purveyor of truth, instead of going and looking up things, reading things for yourself, and then using your critical thinking and critical analysis to understand it. Okay, so this is another problem we are faced with when it comes to trying to shake people out of their hypnosis, is that they come under the hypnosis, the hypnotic spell of someone else, right? And they don't see this. They don't see that that person is actually as inauthentic, as Ted Turner or CNN or whoever else, Anderson Cooper, right, who's giving them this fake news. And it's very, very hard to break through these cults of personality. And that's something I try and dissuade people against myself, okay? When it comes to me, I'm presenting the information, but I don't want it to be about me. It's got nothing to do with me, right? People shouldn't be looking to set up a cult around me. That would be wrong. What I want people to do is think for themselves. Okay, what I want for people to do is not to buy into these cults of personality, to be individuals, to read if I recommend works to people, I want them to go and read those works. I don't want them to take my word for what I'm saying. Okay, that would be wrong. But again, as I say, the conspiracy movement got so deeply co-opted and so manipulated by these same forces, this new world order, that today it's literally the same shit, different day. That's what's going on, and it's unsettling at times to see that in this world, John. It's unsettling, but what are you going to do? We have to contend with these things in these times.
But they must be laughing their asses off, right?
Oh yeah.
How we continue to pick a side, left, right, or even libertarian. Oh, that is such a wild, uh, you know, just a third option. Wow, we have got three options now, but I always wonder, what is the ultimate goal? I mean, the New World Order is basically international communism, right?
Yes.
So is it a fair observation that that we are already, if not in it, or entering that?
We have bought into it hook, line, and sinker. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm talking about the majority here, by the way. I'm not talking about those people that have paid attention to the information, the authentic, true information has been presented to them by a number of people. It's not just people that are truthers or whatever else, or people that are familiar with the deeper aspects of espionage, like myself, for example, or it's not just people like this. Numerous people are presenting a great deal of very good information to the masses, right? So there are a few people that are, as I say, truly awake and aware and understand what the heck's going on. Others aren't, but the majority actually aren't. This is the key problem. So they've bought into the whole idea. They've bought into the ideologies hook, line, and sinker. And they don't realize this. A great example is what's happened with the Roman Catholic Church yet again. Okay, now we talked about this at the outset, but if you take a look at where Pope Francis is taking the Catholic Church, he's taking it in the direction of liberation theology, which was an ideology that was concocted by the KGB in order to infiltrate the Roman Catholic Church, to take it back to its fascistic, communistic roots. Okay, so but so many people. So if they escape the ideology of communism proper, there's communism light, which is socialism. If you escape that, there's democratic socialism. If you escape that, then there's these religious ideologies that are used to again enslave people, like Roman Catholicism, right? It's being used again to enslave people. You've got Pope Francis saying we should be welcoming of migrants. We should not think about the safety and security of our children or their families or any of this. Let's just, this is nonsensical. This is not very healthy for a society. But that's the, again, religious control side of it, you see. You've got the Islamists going forth indoctrinating their masses, saying, yes, kill the infidel. Nobody really knows why they want to kill the infidel, except for the fact that they are the infidel, right? So it's these lunatic, insane people that are out there doing all of this. And they've bought into it hook, line, and sinker, and they are implementing their plans legally, politically, socially. So yes, the masses are, in point of fact, already ushering in the New World Order, and they do not know this. So we are not only in the first stages of it, we are a long way down the road in terms of full implementation of it. We are a hair's breadth away from a one world centralized government.
Right.
That's where we stand right now. Yeah.
And it's as if there's this war on common sense, really, because the things you just said about, Islam or the migrant crisis, let them all in. Who fucking cares, Common sense will say, wait a minute, well, at least you question these policies, right? But now we've got some ideology to focus on. So that's probably the best thing to do, because everyone else seems to be hanging on that, So maybe to wrap this up a bit, because we're a bit over time, I think.
That's all right. Yeah.
All right. But since we're all caught up in these ideologies and mindsets, which are not our own, how do we then try to bring back the love for actual wisdom, actual, truth seeking? Because the truth movement, if you will, began as a kind of this obscure, authentic, fringe group who actually wanted to know things. And as you said, I also got the feeling that it's being co-opted at some point. And I think we both know which outlet we are talking about, but I'm not sure. But I don't want to name names here. But so the love for wisdom versus the clinging on to somebody else's mindset, is that basically the war that's going on right now?
I think so. I think so. I think that the only thing, well, there's a few things we would have to do, I think, to push back against this new world order, and that actually involves, first of all, gaining wisdom. And wisdom, by the way, is not intelligence; is a completely different thing. Wisdom is the application of knowledge. The application of knowledge. Gathering the knowledge is your first goal, essentially. It's your first step to understanding. Okay, so you gather the knowledge, then you gather your understanding. Okay, and that is to say, you process the information that you have taken in and come to some sort of logical conclusions using the process of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Now, once you've got your understanding and you've got the knowledge, then you begin to apply that knowledge. Okay, and the application of that knowledge is what wisdom fundamentally is. That is to say, you're taking practical steps in the real world to address many of the problems that we face as a society. Now, most people are not doing that. This is why I'm saying that I'm very, very skeptical about any sort of real world change happening, or whether we'll actually be able to prevent this one world, new world order from doing what it wants to do. Because too many people aren't applying the knowledge. There are many who are. Many people are out there right now getting arrested. Okay, they are challenging the police, the authorities, the governments who are trying to bring in this totalitarian system. They're challenging them and being put in jail, right? So there are people that are taking real world action, but there just aren't enough of them. Not enough people are defending free speech. Free speech is a central component to being able to gain wisdom and to being able to gain knowledge and understanding and so on and so forth. So we really need to start applying our knowledge. And more importantly, before we start even doing that, we need to understand the philosophical underpinnings of what Western civilization began with and what made it so great in the first place, because it's no longer great. Take a look at what's happening in the West right now, right? We're just giving in to everything. We've become submissive. We have become like the battered, abused housewife. That is what has happened. We have become effeminate. We have lost our respect for masculinity. All of that is gone. And so we need to get that back if we're going to do anything about these problems. And right now, we're just not doing that. But a return to philosophy, that's what really needs to happen. We need to return to the roots of understanding, whether it's Greek philosophy, whether it's German philosophy, whether it's the ancient Nordic philosophies or the Indian philosophies, the Vedic philosophies. It doesn't matter. We have to start somewhere. Whether it's Confucius, the Tao, we have to start doing that. And we have to start separating ourselves from ideologies. Because the more we buy into ideologies, the more enslaved our minds are going to become. We can't use one ideology to replace another ideology. which is what people are looking to do consistently and continuously. It doesn't work. You just end up under a different form of slavery.
So yeah, I'm just starting this podcast, because I think there cannot be enough podcasts that talk about these things, but I'm still learning as well. I mean, I'm I of course books are a great tool, and every month or so I have a new book. This constant hunger for wanting to understand the world and yourself. I cannot imagine someone who is not interested in that, because you are alive, you are here, you're right here now, and you just don't understand where you are, and that's something I cannot really grasp. So this is a humbling thing to actually talk with, like we do now. It's a humbling experience, but it's humbling in the sense that it's actually benefiting us and the world, because these groups that are claiming to be victims of the patriarchy or any other thing, ultimately they are victims of something else. It's well, as you said, the new world order. That is something that we all are victim of. Instead of these tiny aspects of these political things that they, and I'm saying they, implemented. Because we have to get this wider scope, I think.
We do, and this is again something that really needs to be encouraged in people. To have a wider depth of understanding. You see, it's not just the political side of things that people need to understand, although that figures into it in quite a large sense. Mm-hmm. And it's not just the occult aspects that people need to understand, and it's not just the economic systems that are running currently, like the Keynesian models that have been adopted, that cater to socialism and communism. It's not just the central banking mechanisms. It's a whole number of things that people really need to grapple with and understand, in order to really get how they are being hollowed out as people, right? There's a lot to it. It's psychological, it's emotional, it's spiritual, as I say as well. The spiritual aspects we haven't really had the time to touch on too much, but they figure into it in a very real sense as well. Because one of the things I was saying in a previous podcast that I did with Michael Tessarian and David
Whitehead.
On the I can't remember which one it was that we did. I think it was it'll come back to me. But the one that we did, we were talking about this subject as well, and I was making the point that let me see how best to phrase this. That the human being is more than merely the sum of our memories or our experiences. That we are a conscious being, and that our consciousness is actually metaphysical. That is to say, it does not reside in the physical. Okay, it actually has a category all of its own, which is what makes it fundamentally metaphysical. The physical parameters give rise to consciousness, certainly, but the physical parameters themselves are not consciousness. They do not constitute consciousness. So the conscious being that we are is something that is far more profound than people understand. And this is why in the current times you actually run into the hard problem. Philosophers and scientists run into this problem. It's called the hard problem of consciousness, right? So there's that spiritual aspect to who we are also is something that needs to be nourished and understood, and we need to get a greater understanding of who we truly are at our core in a metaphysical sense. But again, that's in a great many ways too deep for people to grasp right now. And again, I'm talking about the masses here. It's too much for them to grasp, because they've had all of that ripped out of them. Okay, they've had all of that meaning and understanding and depth to who they are, to their character, to their personality, to the depths of their soul. It's all been ripped out of them. So before, little by little, the pieces have to be put back together. And I fear that it might actually be too late to even start doing that. I hope it's not. And I will do everything in my own power to make sure that that's not the case in so much as I can. And I'm sure that you feel in many respects the same way, Because if humanity goes down, guess what? We're all humans. That means that you, John, and me, we're all going to go down with it. I'd much rather try and avoid that if I can, right? So this is actually, in a sense, what I'm doing is um, a selfish form of enlightenment, if you will, right? It's a
I
selfish
see.
form of thinking in a great many ways. It's actually to do with my own self-preservation
Right.
more than anything else.
Yeah. Well, there's so much to talk about, you know. I mean, especially, you know, we've just touched upon several important key things, and I would love to talk to you again sometime to explore more things, more subjects, because this is too big to understand in just 1 hour or 2 hours. You know, it might take a lifetime, and I'm willing to do that. You know, because what else is there than truth and reality? And ultimately, it's about love and self-love and empathy. I mean, that is these ingredients are being well taken away from us.
Well, I think so. And just to sum up as we close off here, I would say
Hmm.
that the proliferation of hate and fear is what these people thrive on. Okay, the proliferation of feelings-based thinking, and by feelings and emotions, I'm not referring to just straight away when you say, and this is another form of programming that's been done to people. When you talk about emotions, people assume that you're talking about love or that you're talking about happiness. That's not necessarily the case. Emotions can be very, very negative in the case of fear or hate and anger and so on. When this anger, particularly when it's channeled improperly. Anger itself, by the way, is not necessarily a negative emotion, but that's something we can talk about another time. Anger can be very, very useful, particularly if it's righteous anger. That being said, fear and hate are certainly used to manipulate the masses. And it's being done more and more. And we're giving into that collective form of thinking where everything is fear based. And this is part of the reason why we're actually seeing a resurgence in these pockets of aware people of these concepts of truth and logic, right? Because those do not involve any form of hatred of other people in the abstract. You see, it doesn't involve any of that. If we talk about, for example, as we have been, these ideologies, we're talking about abstract ideologies which are being implemented, and people have become the vessels for them, thus they've become ideologically possessed. So, in regards to these things, we're not hating anyone. We're not saying that, you know, anyone, any human being has any lesser of a value unless, and this would be the proviso, they have done something in terms of their actions to cause harm and suffering to other people, right? So we're basically talking about these abstract things, these abstract notions, these ideologies. And so we're not invoking anything hateful. We're not doing anything remotely like that. Unfortunately, in the current times, with hate speech laws and what have you, things can be deemed as hateful when, in point of fact, they're not. They're merely facts. They're merely logical truths, objective truths, objective realities. And so, again, but as long as we keep pursuing the truth without uh, without being subject to these emotions of fear and hate, then we will succeed. But the moment we give in to fear and hate, that's when we fail. That's when our emotions get the better of us, and uh, none of that fear and hate is going to solve the problems. You see, that's the thing.
Hmm.
Anyway, I think that's a good note to perhaps close off on.
Right. Well, Michael, it was a very good talk, and I hope to do this again sometime, and maybe we can explore more subjects. You know, because I'm actually, you know, it's an honor to talk with you, someone who is very knowledgeable, and I must say that you really inspire me. You actually helped me and inspire me to do this kind of thing. You know, because I actually have a stutter. You know, I'm a stutterer, but I try to minimize it. And talking is just really my it's the most annoying thing that I can actually do, but I think this is all worth it, and you are really helping to inspire me in that. So I want to thank you again for that and for this conversation.
Well, thank you very much. That's very kind of you to say. In actual point of fact, I started out life as a stutterer as well. So we are two
Really?
stutterers having a conversation here, which is
Fun.
exactly.
All right.
But no, this was an absolute pleasure, and I thank you again for inviting me on.
All right. Awesome. All right. Cheers, Michael.
Thanks very much.